Hey folks, I'm glad you're here. What if I told you that in medieval Europe, a pig could be arrested? A king could marry his own cousin to improve the bloodline, and waking up at midnight was considered healthy. Not rebellious, not dramatic, healthy. Tonight, we are stepping into a world that felt normal to the people living in it and completely unbelievable to us. No dragons, no magic, just human beings making very confident decisions and calling them wisdom. So go ahead, dim the lights, let the room grow softer, put your phone down. Take a slow breath. We are walking into candlelight now. Imagine we're sitting near a small fire. It crackles softly. The stone walls around us are cold, but the mood is calm. Outside, the wind slides across a medieval village, and somewhere in the distance, a pig is about to receive legal representation. Yes, let's begin there. In certain parts of medieval Europe, animals could be put on trial. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, legally. If a pig harmed someone, especially a child, it could be arrested, locked up, brought before a judge. There are real records describing pigs dressed in clothing for execution. Lawyers were assigned, witnesses were heard, and nobody laughed. That's the important part. Nobody stood up and said, "Perhaps we've lost perspective." Because to them, the world was structured by divine order. Everything had its place. Humans, animals, kings, peasants. If an animal broke the moral order, then justice had to restore balance. It feels absurd now, but to them it was consistency. Law applied to all living things, even Gerald the pig. Imagine being that lawyer. You trained, you studied theology, you learned Latin, and now you're arguing that your client technically only nibbled. History is quiet about how often these defenses worked, but the trials happened, and that tells us something important. Medieval people were not chaotic. They were extremely serious about structure, even when the structure looked strange. Now let's drift slightly upward, from the village square to the castle. Because if pigs had courtrooms, kings had family trees that looked like tangled fishing nets. Royal marriage was not about love. It was about alliances, territory, power. And if you want to keep power within a circle, eventually that circle becomes very small. Cousins married cousins. Uncles married nieces. Dynasties convinced themselves they were preserving purity. They were actually narrowing options until the bloodline began folding in on itself. One famous example is the Habsburg family. They ruled large parts of Europe for centuries, strong, influential, elegant in portraits. But if you look closely at those portraits, you notice something slowly shifting. The jaw. It grows more pronounced over generations, more forward, more dominant, until it becomes difficult to ignore. What history politely called the Habsburg jaw was the result of repeated cousin marriages, over and over. One later king struggled to chew properly. He had trouble speaking clearly. His health was fragile. He was labeled the Bewitched, which sounds dramatic, mystical, but it wasn't witchcraft, it was genetics. The tragic part is this: they believed they were strengthening their dynasty. Instead, they were quietly weakening it. Power can be very confident in its own mistakes, and medieval royalty had a talent for doubling down. Now let's soften the scene. Let's step away from royal jaws and return to something gentler: sleep. You probably imagine medieval people collapsing into bed after a long day of farm work. 8 hours, simple. But no, they practiced what historians call segmented sleep. First sleep, then they woke up. For an hour, sometimes 2, they would sit quietly, pray, reflect, talk to a spouse, maybe even visit a neighbor if they lived nearby. Then they returned to bed for second sleep. Waking at midnight wasn't anxiety. It wasn't doom scrolling. It was part of the rhythm. There's something oddly peaceful about that. The night wasn't a solid wall of unconsciousness. It had a pause, a quiet breathing space. Candles would flicker. The village would murmur softly, and then everyone drifted back into dreams. It feels almost healthier than our modern panic about, "I woke up at 3 a.m., something must be wrong." To them, it wasn't wrong. It was scheduled. Now, from peaceful sleep, let's glide gently into justice. Imagine standing in a medieval courtroom. 2 men accuse each other of lying. There is no camera footage, no email receipts. So the judge proposes something that feels very balanced: fight, trial by combat.
Whoever wins the fight wins the case, because God would not allow the innocent to lose. That was the logic. It sounds brutal, but to them it was sacred. The duel was not random violence. It had ceremony, rules, prayer. The belief in divine justice was so strong that physical victory equaled moral truth. Sometimes nobles hired champions to fight on their behalf. Imagine being that champion. Your job description: settle legal disputes using a sword. No pressure. If you trip, your client is guilty. It lasted for centuries in different forms. And if we're honest, humans still sometimes equate winning with being right. The arena has changed. The instinct has not. Now let's step into a medieval home. Small, dim, the floor is packed earth, and in the corner is a goat or a few chickens, sometimes even a cow. Animals often lived inside peasant houses during winter. It kept them safe from theft, protected them from cold, added warmth. It also added fragrance. But when survival is the goal, comfort becomes flexible. People layered clothing instead of bathing frequently. After waves of plague, some believed water opened pores and allowed illness inside the body. So they washed hands, they changed linen, they used herbs and perfume. Clean clothing was protection. To us, that sounds questionable. To them, it was practical thinking based on the knowledge available. That's something important to remember. They were not foolish. They were working with limited information. Now let's turn the fire down slightly. Let's move back into the castle, because the strangest medieval stories
often belong to royalty, not peasants. Picture a king, young, crowned early, raised with ceremony but not much affection, surrounded by advisors who bow but do not trust him, married to someone chosen for politics, under immense pressure to produce a male heir. If no son arrives, whispers begin. The same close marriages that shaped the famous royal jaw also affected fertility. Health issues passed quietly through generations, but no one wanted to admit that the system itself was the cause. So they blamed fate, or witches, or God. Some kings withdrew into melancholy. Depression existed, of course. It just had different names. There were rulers who refused to leave their chambers for weeks. Some believed their bodies were fragile. One believed he was made of glass and might shatter if touched. Imagine governing a kingdom while convinced you are porcelain. It sounds almost humorous, but underneath it is lonely. Royalty looked powerful from a distance. Up close, it was isolating. Every friendship was political, every marriage strategic, every child evaluated as future leverage. And in that pressure, human minds bent. That may be the quietest strange thing about medieval life. Not the trials, not the swords, not the livestock in the living room, but the emotional weight. People were born into roles they could not escape. Kings who feared cracking, queens who feared replacement, heirs who feared siblings, and outside castle walls, ordinary villagers simply tried to survive winters, plagues, and taxes. It was a world that felt normal to them, structured, ordered, meaningful. Even when that order included prosecuting farm animals, even when justice required armor, even when bloodlines quietly twisted in on themselves. And as our candle burns lower, as the village settles into its first sleep, we leave them here for now. The anxious kings, the midnight thinkers, the very serious pig. The fire softens, the stone walls grow cooler, and in the distance, history exhales. We will drift deeper next time. There are darker corners waiting. But for now, rest.
The fire has burned low now. The air is cooler. Somewhere outside the castle walls, a dog barks once, then decides it was not worth the effort. Let's drift a little further, because medieval life did not only invent strange laws, it invented strange fears, and fear was everywhere. Not loud fear, not dramatic screaming in the streets, but a steady, quiet awareness that something invisible might be watching, especially during plague years. When sickness arrived, it did not knock politely. It moved through villages like fog, slow, silent, uncertain. No one knew about bacteria. No one knew about fleas carrying disease from rats. They only knew that people felt fine one day and were buried the next. So they searched for reasons. And humans are very creative when searching for reasons. Some blamed bad air, miasma they called it, poisoned atmosphere. So they carried flowers, herbs, spices pressed to their noses. Imagine walking through town holding a bouquet not for romance, but for survival. Others blamed sin. When plague struck, people asked, "Who angered God?" It must be someone. It cannot be random. Random is unbearable. So communities looked for patterns, for outsiders, for difference. And here, medieval normal becomes uncomfortable. Certain groups were blamed unfairly, accused without evidence, punished for things they did not cause. History repeats this pattern often. When fear grows large enough, logic grows small. But let's soften slightly. Not everything was accusation and panic. Sometimes fear created strange fashion instead. Doctors during plague years developed an outfit that today looks like something from a surreal dream. Long coat, gloves, and a mask shaped like a bird's beak. Inside the beak, herbs and spices were packed to filter the bad air. It must have felt reassuring at the time. Imagine seeing a tall figure in black, bird-faced, walking slowly down a narrow street. If you were already sick, that sight alone might finish the job. But to them, it was protection. Again, strange to us, practical to them. Now let's float over to another royal disaster. Because if plague shaped peasants, marriage shaped kings. There was a constant obsession in medieval courts. Produce a male heir. A son meant stability. A daughter meant negotiation. If a queen produced only daughters, whispers began almost immediately.
And whispers in stone castles travel faster than sound. Sometimes queens were replaced, sometimes blamed, sometimes quietly pushed aside into convents. The pressure was relentless. Imagine giving birth in a cold chamber, surrounded by nobles watching like they are evaluating livestock. And when the child cries, the room waits. Is it a boy, or will we have to try again? Romance was not invited to the wedding. Politics attended instead. And occasionally, the political solution created deeply awkward family trees. Royal families across Europe intermarried so often that alliances began to look less like partnerships and more like reunions. There are letters between royal cousins that read almost sweetly, until you realize they are also discussing marriage arrangements to each other. Now, here is the strange contrast. These were the most powerful people in Europe, and yet they had the least freedom in choosing who to love. Power can be a cage made of gold. You can see the world from high windows, but you cannot step outside. Let's slow down for a moment. Picture a long stone hallway at night. Torches flicker. A young prince stands alone, maybe 14 years old. He knows he will rule someday. He also knows that if he fails to produce an heir, the dynasty may collapse. That is a heavy thought for someone who still cannot grow a proper beard. Medieval childhood for royalty was short. Responsibility arrived early, and affection was often strategic. Now, we turn gently toward fashion, because even clothing could be illegal. Yes, there were laws called sumptuary laws. These rules dictated who could wear what. Certain colors were reserved for nobles. Certain fabrics were restricted. If you were a merchant and decided to dress like a lord, you could be fined. Your shirt could become a crime. Why? Because appearance maintained order. If clothing blurred class lines, hierarchy weakened, and hierarchy was everything. Imagine being told, "You cannot wear purple. That shade is above your salary." It sounds ridiculous, but in a world built on visible rank, clothing was identity. Break the dress code, and you break social stability. Now let's step back into a village. Night has fallen again. People have completed their first sleep. They wake gently. The room is dark, but not silent. A husband and wife whisper. Someone outside coughs. A candle is lit. This in-between hour was often used for reflection, prayer, sometimes intimacy, and sometimes simply sitting quietly. There's something tender about it. In a world full of disease, war, and rigid hierarchy, there existed this small, soft pause in the middle of the night. Not everything medieval was harsh. Some things were simply different rhythms. But speaking of harsh, let's talk about justice again. Public executions were events, not hidden, not private. They were scheduled. Crowds gathered. Vendors sometimes sold food nearby. Children watched. Justice was meant to be seen. It was a warning, a lesson, a spectacle. And here's the ironic part. For many villagers, it was also entertainment. In a world without streaming services, this was the live event. It sounds dark, but boredom is powerful, and medieval life could be very repetitive. An execution broke routine. It reminded everyone of consequences, and it reassured them that order was being maintained. There is a pattern forming, isn't there? Everything strange circles back to order. Trials for pigs maintained moral order. Combat maintained divine order. Dress laws maintained social order. Executions maintained legal order. In a world that felt fragile, order was comfort. Now let's lower the tone slightly, because not all strangeness was dramatic. Some of it was quietly human. Take medicine. If you had a headache, a fever, or sadness, a common solution was bloodletting. Doctors believed the body contained 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Illness meant imbalance, so they drained blood to restore balance. Leeches were popular helpers. Barbers often performed these procedures. Yes, the person trimming your hair might also remove a pint of your blood. The red and white barber pole you see today, it represents blood and bandages. Strange, isn't it? But again, it was logical within their system. They were not trying to harm people. They were trying to heal them with the knowledge they had. And sometimes patients survived, which reinforced the belief. Now picture a medieval king feeling unwell. He is pale, weak. Advisors worry. A barber surgeon approaches with confidence. More blood is removed. The king becomes weaker, but everyone nods seriously, convinced this is progress. Power does not protect you from misunderstanding science. Sometimes it simply gives you more elaborate misunderstanding. The fire is almost out now. The room is quiet. We have walked through courtrooms with pigs, through castles of tangled bloodlines, through midnight wakefulness, through plague streets and fashion crimes, and through kings who feared shattering like glass. None of it felt absurd at the time. It felt structured, intentional, necessary. That is perhaps the most unsettling thought. Every era believes it is rational. Every system believes it makes sense. And centuries later, someone else sits by a fire, gently amused. Rest for a moment. There are still more corners to explore, more royal awkwardness, more quiet tragedies, more beautifully strange normal things. Let your breathing slow. Let the stone walls fade. We will keep drifting forward, softly.
The night deepens. The village is quieter now. Even the goat inside the house has settled down, which is impressive because goats are not known for respecting bedtime. Let's keep walking, slowly, because there is another very normal medieval habit that feels almost fictional to us. Relics. People collected bones, not casually, not in a strange backyard hobby way, in a holy way. Across Europe, churches proudly displayed pieces of saints, a finger, a tooth, sometimes a whole arm, carefully preserved, decorated in gold and jewels. Pilgrims traveled long distances just to see them, because relics were believed to hold power. Healing power, protective power, spiritual power. If your town owned a famous relic, it became important, wealthier, safer, people hoped. Now here is the gentle irony. There were so many pieces of certain saints scattered across Europe that if you assembled them all together, the saint would have required several extra bodies, multiple skulls, several left hands, enough bones to build a small village. But people believed, and belief itself can be powerful. If you were sick and you touched a jeweled container said to hold a saint's rib, and then you recovered, that confirmed the miracle. No one paused to ask about infection cycles or immune response. They thanked heaven and went home relieved. In a fragile world, hope is precious, even if that hope is built on enthusiastic bone distribution. Now, let's drift gently into another corner of medieval daily life: food. You might imagine feasts in grand halls, roasted meats, overflowing goblets. And yes, nobles ate well, but most people's meals were simple: bread, porridge, vegetables. Meat was rare for peasants. Spices were expensive. Salt was valuable. In fact, some wars and trade routes revolved around spice access. Imagine risking your life on a dangerous voyage for pepper. Pepper. Today, it sits quietly on your table, ignored unless missing. Back then, it was status, and nobles loved to show status. They would use spices not only for flavor, but for display. Sweet and savory dishes mixed in ways that would confuse a modern kitchen. Meat with sugar, fish with fruit syrup.
It was less about taste harmony and more about spectacle. If you could afford cinnamon, everyone needed to know. Now, picture a medieval feast hall.
Long tables, torches flickering, music drifting from somewhere slightly off-key. A noble bites into an elaborate dish and nods solemnly, because dignity must be maintained, even if the chicken tastes faintly like dessert. Meanwhile, peasants outside are eating bread so dense it could defend a castle wall. Normal. That was simply normal. Now let's move into something quieter, something more personal. Marriage contracts, not royal ones, ordinary ones. Love existed, of course. Humans have always fallen in love, but marriage was often practical. Families arranged matches based on land, trade, stability. A daughter might meet her husband for the first time on her wedding day. Awkward introductions were common. Hello, we will now share property and produce children. Romantic comedies would have struggled, but within that system, people still formed affection. Partnerships grew over time, and sometimes love quietly bloomed inside arrangements that began as business. Humans adapt beautifully, even inside rigid structures. Now let's tilt slightly towards something darker, but softly. Witch accusations. When crops failed, when cows stopped giving milk, when illness lingered, communities sometimes looked for someone to blame. Often it was an older woman, a widow, someone who lived alone, someone different. The fear was rarely loud at first. It built slowly. Whispers, side glances. A strange look becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes certainty. Trials followed. Confessions were sometimes forced, and once again, order was being restored. It is painful to look at, but it was woven into normal life in certain times and places. People believed they were protecting their community. Fear plus certainty is a dangerous combination. Now let's take a breath. Let's not stay too long in that tension. Instead, imagine a medieval marketplace in the morning. Stalls open, cloth displayed, fish laid on wooden boards, people bargaining loudly. Medieval towns were not silent or gray. They were colorful, busy, smelled intensely alive. You would hear multiple languages if it was a trade city. Merchants traveled far. Ideas traveled with them, even rumors. News moved slower than today, but it moved. And when news arrived, it arrived dramatically. A rider appears at the gate, dusty,
exhausted, announcing a war, a marriage alliance, a death. Information was precious. There were no constant updates, just bursts of history landing suddenly. Now imagine being a king hearing that news. One message can change everything. An heir has died. A brother has rebelled. A neighboring ruler is invading. Royal life was never calm. Even in moments of peace, tension sat beneath the surface. And some rulers did not handle tension well. There were kings known for explosive tempers, throwing objects, shouting at advisors, storming out of councils. Others retreated into silence, refusing to speak for days. Courts adapted around these personalities. Advisors learned to read mood like weather. Is it a glass king day or a sword-throwing day? You can imagine the cautious steps in the hallway. Power often magnifies personality. If you are anxious, you become profoundly anxious. If you are angry, the anger echoes louder. Now, let's return briefly to something strangely charming: festivals. Medieval calendars were full of feast days, religious holidays, local celebrations. For a few days, strict hierarchies loosened. People dressed in costumes, roles reversed in playful ways. A peasant might parody a noble. Laughter filled streets. These were pressure valves, releasing tension built up from hard labor and rigid class systems. And then, after the festival, everything returned to order, almost like segmented sleep, a break, then structure again. That rhythm appears everywhere in medieval life: work and feast, fear and faith, rigidity and brief release. Now, before we let this part fade, let's return one last time to royalty. Picture a grand wedding, a teenage bride in heavy fabric, a teenage groom trying to look confident. Behind them stand two dynasties calculating the future. Land will shift hands, alliances will strengthen. Children are already being discussed before the first dance. The couple smiles politely. They bow. They enter a life chosen for them long before they understood the word choice. Some adapted.
Some grew bitter, some became legends, and some quietly disappeared into history, remembered only through footnotes about alliances. Strange, isn't it? The most powerful lives often felt the least personal. Meanwhile, a villager down the road might marry for affection, even if poor. History does not always reward freedom with wealth, or wealth with happiness. The fire is barely glowing now. The air feels softer. We have walked through relic collections, strange medicine, fashion crimes, midnight awakenings, witch fears, royal anxiety, and marketplaces full of noise. All of it completely normal to those living inside it. If you had been born there, you would not question it. You would wake for first sleep. You would respect dress laws. You might even attend a pig trial with solemn curiosity, because normal is simply what surrounds you long enough. Let your breathing slow again. The night is steady. There are still more layers beneath this world, more quiet contradictions, more gentle absurdities. We will keep moving forward, softly.
The night is steady now. The fire has collapsed into quiet embers. Outside, the village is wrapped in that deep medieval darkness. No streetlights, no glowing windows across the horizon, just black sky and the slow turning of the stars. Let's keep drifting, because there is something else that was completely normal and deeply uncomfortable to modern ears: childhood. Not in a cruel way exactly, just different. Children in medieval times were not wrapped in years of protected innocence. If you were born into a peasant family, you worked early, very early.
By 7 or 8, many children were already helping in fields, carrying water, tending animals, not as punishment, just as survival. Life expectancy was shorter, labor was constant, every pair of hands mattered. If you were born into nobility, childhood looked different, but not necessarily softer. A noble child might be sent away at a young age to serve in another household. A future knight trained early. A princess learned diplomacy before she learned herself. And affection, while present, was often overshadowed by duty. Imagine being 10 years old and already knowing that one day you will marry someone you have never met to secure peace between two kingdoms. That is a heavy bedtime thought. Now, let's gently turn towards something oddly practical. Time. You check your phone and see 10:43 p.m. Medieval people did not live like that. Clocks existed in some cities later on, but for most of the Middle Ages, time was guided by bells, sun, and church rhythm. Morning prayers, midday prayers, evening prayers. Life was structured by sound. The bell rings, you wake. The bell rings, you stop. The bell rings, you gather. There is something calming about that. No notifications, no calendar alerts, just one bell deciding everything. Of course, that bell also reminded you constantly that life revolved around faith. Religion was not a weekend activity. It was air. It shaped law, education, morality, even medicine. And if you stepped too far outside accepted belief, things could become uncomfortable. Heresy was not just disagreement, it was danger. Ideas could be punished. Books could be banned. Words mattered.
And that created a world where thinking carefully was important, or at least thinking quietly. Now let's float towards something surprisingly intimate. Teeth. Yes, dental care. It was not advanced. Sugar slowly entered European diets through trade. Teeth began to decay more frequently. Toothaches were common. Solutions were simple. Pull it out. Barbers again. They truly did everything. Haircut, shave, minor surgery, tooth extraction. You could walk in for a trim and leave missing a molar. Multitasking. And pain relief was limited. Herbs, alcohol, or courage. Imagine sitting in a wooden chair, gripping the sides, while someone with no formal dental degree approaches with metal tools and confidence. Normal, just another Tuesday. Now let's soften the image. Picture a monastery, stone walls, candlelight reflecting off parchment, monks copying manuscripts by hand, slowly, carefully, every letter shaped with patience. Books were rare, knowledge was precious. It moved slowly. A single manuscript could take months to produce. In that quiet space, history was preserved. Stories were copied. Philosophy was guarded. In many ways, monasteries were the memory keepers of Europe. While outside, wars shifted borders and kings argued about heirs. Inside,
Someone calmly copied text, line by line. It's comforting, isn't it, that even in chaotic times there were rooms devoted to quiet preservation. Now let's step back into chaos for a moment. War. Medieval war was not constant everywhere, but it was common, and it was personal. Sieges could last months, castles surrounded, food running low, people waiting. Waiting was often the most exhausting part, not battle, waiting. Inside walls, nobles calculated. Outside walls, soldiers shivered. Armor looked impressive. It was also heavy. And knights, despite modern fantasy, were not always graceful. There are documented cases of armored men falling and struggling to stand. Heroic, but slightly awkward.
Imagine clanking toward glory and tripping on uneven ground. History rarely shows that part in paintings. Now here's something quietly ironic. The same nobles who fought brutal wars also wrote poetry about love. Courtly love was a medieval concept that glorified devotion, often to someone unattainable. A knight might pledge admiration to a married noblewoman, write verses about longing. It was romantic and complicated, and sometimes slightly dramatic. Picture a man in full armor, whispering tender poetry under a balcony, and then returning to battlefield strategy the next day. Humans contain multitudes, even medieval ones. Now, let's drift toward something that feels small but mattered greatly. Shoes. Most peasants owned one pair, maybe two. Clothing was expensive. Fabric took time to produce. When something tore, it was repaired, again and again. Fast fashion did not exist. Wardrobes were small, possessions were few, and because of that, objects carried weight. A cloak was valuable, a ring was symbolic, a sword was legacy. Things were not disposable. They were inherited, passed down, carried through generations. There is something grounding about that. Now, before we let this part close, let's return one last time to a royal chamber. A king sits alone. He has land, gold, power. He also has rivals, siblings who might rebel, advisors who might betray, foreign rulers who watch carefully. He cannot relax fully. Even in silence, strategy hums in his mind. His marriage was political. His children are future chess pieces. He trusts few. He sleeps in guarded rooms. And yet, outside the castle walls, a farmer sleeps deeply after long labor. Different burdens, different fears, strange contrasts. The medieval world was not one story, it was layers. Peasants surviving winter, monks preserving texts, barbers pulling teeth, queens hoping for sons, kings fearing weakness, villagers attending pig trials, doctors draining blood, people waking in the middle of the night and believing it was perfectly normal. That is what makes this era fascinating. It is not absurd in isolation. It is logical within its own structure.
Every strange habit fit inside a system that made sense to those living it. And if someone from the year 1300 stepped into your world, they might find your habits just as bizarre. Sleeping 8 straight hours, ignoring bells, trusting invisible germs instead of bad air, wearing purple without permission. We are all normal inside our own candlelight. The embers are nearly gone now. The stars outside remain steady. The medieval village is quiet in its second sleep, and we will keep walking soon. There are still deeper corners to explore, more ironies, more gentle tragedies, more human contradictions. For now, let the darkness feel calm. Let the history breathe softly and rest for a moment longer.
The embers glow again. Morning is not here yet, but the world is stirring. A rooster clears his throat somewhere in the distance, like he owns the sunrise. Let's walk deeper, because we have not yet talked about one of the most normal medieval experiences of all: death. Not in a dramatic way, just present. In medieval Europe, death was not hidden behind hospital curtains. It lived nearby, in homes, in streets, in memory. People died younger on average. Illness was unpredictable. Childbirth was dangerous. Infection could follow the smallest cut. Graveyards were often beside churches, right in the center of town. You passed them daily. You prayed beside them. You lived with that awareness constantly. And strangely, that closeness made death less abstract. People prepared for it carefully. Wills were written, prayers memorized, ritual mattered. The good death was important, surrounded by family, confession given, soul ready. Imagine knowing that your final moment might arrive without warning and structuring your life around spiritual readiness. That was normal. Now, let's soften the edge slightly, because medieval humor existed too. People made jokes. They teased authority in subtle ways. Festivals allowed parody. Songs carried hidden sarcasm. There were even medieval manuscripts where bored monks doodled strange creatures in the margins: tiny rabbits attacking knights, snails fighting soldiers, absurd drawings in otherwise serious religious texts. Even in rigid systems, humor leaks out. Now, let's glide toward another royal thread. Dynastic anxiety never truly slept. Imagine a queen who has given birth 6 times. 3 children did not survive infancy. 1 daughter is healthy. 2 sons are fragile. The court watches closely. If a prince coughs twice, advisors exchange worried glances, because a single illness can undo alliances built over decades. That pressure weighed heavily. And sometimes, when history has many quiet royal disappearances. Not dramatic like fantasy epics, just subtle. A young prince sent away, never returning. Official explanation: illness. Whispers: something else. Let's not linger too darkly. Instead, let's step into a medieval classroom. It is small, cold. Most people could not read.
Literacy was limited, especially among peasants. Education was often tied to church institutions. If you could read, you held power. Words were rare tools. Think about that. In a world where most knowledge was spoken and remembered, a written page carried enormous weight. That is why books were chained to desks in some places, not metaphorically, physically chained, to prevent theft. Knowledge was valuable enough to secure with iron. Now let's walk into a medieval kitchen. Bread baking slowly, smoke curling toward wooden beams. Most meals were repetitive, but feast days changed everything. On feast days, the monotony broke. Music, extra food, laughter. People needed contrast. Without contrast, life becomes heavy. Which brings us to something quietly normal but deeply strange. Public punishment beyond execution. Stocks in the town square. Pillories. If you committed certain crimes, you might be locked in place while neighbors mocked you, threw vegetables. Public shame was a tool. Order was maintained not only through fear of death, but fear of embarrassment. Imagine your mistake displayed for everyone. In small communities, reputation mattered more than anything. Now, drift back toward royalty once more. There were kings who feared betrayal so deeply that they trusted almost no one. They slept in different chambers unpredictably. They rotated guards. They tasted food carefully. And yet, despite all caution, betrayal still occurred. Poisonings did happen. Plots were whispered. Because when power is concentrated, ambition gathers around it. Sometimes the threat was external. Sometimes it was family, especially family. Dynasties created rivals inside their own bloodlines. A younger brother might feel overlooked. A cousin might feel entitled. And when entitlement meets opportunity, history shifts quietly. Now, let's breathe, because not everything was politics and plague. Art existed.
Stained glass windows glowed with color in cathedrals. Stories were told in images for those who could not read. Light passing through colored glass must have felt miraculous. In a gray stone world, sudden color, beauty mattered. Even in hardship, humans created beauty. Music, too. Simple instruments, voices echoing in stone halls, ballads of heroes, songs of longing, even jokes. Now picture a medieval tavern at dusk. Low light, wooden tables, ale poured generously, travelers exchanging stories, news from distant towns, rumors growing slightly larger with each retelling. Community formed around shared narrative. People needed stories, just like we do. Night falls again. The village has completed another day of labor. Let's step into something both ordinary and slightly unsettling. Medicine again, but this time mental health. There were rulers who experienced what we would now call breakdowns. Some believed they were cursed.
Some believed their bodies were made of glass. Some retreated for months. Courts adjusted around them. Advisors ruled quietly in the background, because admitting instability openly could invite invasion. So struggles were masked, softly explained away. Now let's turn towards something practical: travel. Roads were rough, journeys were slow. Traveling from one kingdom to another could take weeks. Danger was real. Bandits existed. Weather shifted unpredictably. But pilgrims still traveled. Merchants still traveled. Knights still traveled, because movement meant opportunity and sometimes redemption. Pilgrimage was especially common. People walked hundreds of miles to reach holy sites. Blisters, cold nights, simple food, all for
Too anxious, too indecisive. In a violent era, softness could be dangerous. And yet, some gentle rulers are remembered more fondly than fierce conquerors. History has an odd sense of appreciation. Now, let's visit something surprisingly intimate: bathing. Yes, we touched on it before, but here is nuance. Earlier medieval periods did include bathhouses. Public bathing was social in some regions. Later, after plague fears, attitudes shifted. Water became suspicious. Clean linen became defense. Smell was masked with herbs. Hygiene evolved with fear, not ignorance, fear. Now picture a medieval bedroom once more. 2 sleeps, a candle flickering during the waking hour, whispers, prayer, silence. It feels almost poetic. Despite all the strangeness, there were soft rhythms, human rhythms. The stars are fading now. A pale gray light edges across the horizon. Let's finish our walk gently, because medieval life, strange as it seems, was deeply human. People loved fiercely. They feared intensely. They believed strongly. They laughed quietly. They worked constantly. They worried about children. They hoped for better harvests. They trusted systems that made sense to them, even when those systems included pig trials, or sword-based justice, or royal family trees.
Our faith in invisible science, our fashion without restriction, and smile softly. Strange, they might say, very strange. The light grows stronger now. The medieval village wakes. Roosters insist on importance. Doors creak open. Another normal day begins, and we step quietly away, leaving behind the anxious kings, the structured laws, the whispered fears, the quiet beauty, the human contradictions. History does not mock, it simply waits. And if you listen closely, it sounds less like chaos and more like people doing their best inside the candlelight they were given. Rest now. The night has told its story, and the embers are finally still. Good night.